secrets, and in this new secret training video, I just want to talk quickly about the future of game and where I think it's headed. So basically, as of today, at this point in time, basically almost every hot girl on the planet has a smartphone. And there's some pros and cons to that. The pros are, it's very easy to get a hot girl's phone number these days, okay? The cons are, even if you get that phone number, it's almost guaranteed 99% of the time she is going to flake on you, okay? Assuming that you did what every other chump on the planet does, which is just walk up to her, introduce yourself real quick, grab her number, and then take off, and not work actual game, okay? And this is why I'm a huge advocate, especially these days, with the way game has changed in the last 15 years, that you can't just walk up to a hot girl and talk to her for, a few seconds, then grab her phone number and take off. Because if you do that, guaranteed she'll flake on you. Okay, so when you see these prank videos on YouTube and you see guys just like walking up to the girl, and sometimes they won't even speak and they'll just have their cell phone and they'll be like pointing to their cell phone, like put your number in my phone, and then she'll do it, and then they'll take off. Don't think for a second that that chick is ever going to pick up their call. Okay, assuming that she's an 8, 9, or 10. Okay, assuming that she's actually attractive. If the girl's like a 5 or 6, she'll probably take your call. Okay, that's just the way it is, and that's the way it's always been. That's one thing that's never actually changed about games is, girls who are below an 8 in looks, they will generally pick up your phone, they'll return your text, they won't flake on you if you ask them out for a date. Most times they will show up. When it comes to the hotter women, when it comes to the 8s, 9s, and 10s, you have to work solid game. And when I say solid game, I mean solid game. Like, you cannot just walk up to her and ask for her phone number, especially these days. And with the future of where game is headed, it's only going to get even worse. You have all of these like social media sites and all these startups trying to build all these apps and whatnot in order to feed into basically women's narcissism, and that's really changed the game as well, is all these apps and social media sites where girls can get their little fix of validation without needing you to provide that for her. So, even Facebook, like a lot of girls these days, a lot of the younger girls that I'm meeting that are like 19, 20, 21, 22, those girls aren't even using Facebook anymore. They're using this app called Snapchat. And Snapchat is basically a quicker and faster version of Facebook where they can get validation a lot quicker and a lot faster than Facebook. So a lot of them aren't even using Facebook anymore, because even just 5 years ago, I remember I would, generally when I got a girl's phone number, I would also say, well, what's your Facebook? Let me add you on Facebook. And she would add me on Facebook, and I was able to kind of like back up my game. So if I wasn't able to game her, let's say we didn't have enough time during the approach and set, I was able to continue working game over Facebook, and generally I was successful that way because I have a lot of high value photos and a lot of high value videos on Facebook where she could get to see who I am, get to know who I am, and get to see my personality without me doing much. Okay, so even Facebook is out, and like I said, girls are using Snapchat, and a lot of guys don't really use Snapchat. Snapchat's really mostly for girls. So, like I said, you're just going to have more and more social media companies and entrepreneurs starting all these apps that are just going to feed more and more into women's narcissism because they love it. It's highly profitable for them. You can't blame them for doing it. However, as a gamer, as a professional pickup artist, I'm always looking for ways to work around or ways to use that stuff to my advantage, so that I could still go out there and be successful, and I could still teach it to my students. So I'm always on top of these things. I'm always trying to figure out the newest, the latest trends that are going on in technology that are really changing the way game is played. And the good thing is, the good part is, everything that I teach, everything that I teach my students, I'm always making sure that it is timeless. Okay, so I'm never going to teach you anything that is going to be outdated. Okay, or anything that is going to get crushed in the future by some app that hasn't been invented yet, or some social media site that hasn't been created yet. Okay, I'm never going to teach you anything that isn't timeless. All of the principles and everything I teach you is very much timeless, and like I always like to joke, you could travel into the future, 1,000 years in a time machine, and I guarantee 99% of the principles that you're learning from me will still work. Okay, but how are we going to combat, what's going on with basically all of these apps and all these social media sites feeding into women's narcissism? How do we combat that? We combat that by playing solid game, and really that's the only answer to it, is you have to play solid game, and that's something that's never changed. Okay, even if I go back like 20 years when I first started in the game, that hasn't changed. I mean, even back then you had to play solid game. Obviously these days the stakes have been raised. Okay, stakes have been raised to where like just 5 years ago in 2010, I could post a video of myself, doing a number close, and people would be in awe of that. They'd be like, whoa, you got a number, that's crazy, blah, blah, because back then it still meant something. Back then, girls were not nearly as flaky, and they were still picking up your calls, they were still returning your texts, and they were still showing up for the day twos. Now, why were they doing that back then? They were doing that because they didn't have all of these apps and these social media sites to turn to for that shot of validation. Okay, they actually had to turn to you, to the guy, to get that little boost of validation for the day. So really, technology has taken the place of instead of them getting their validation from you, they're getting it from technology. Like I said, Snapchat, Instagram. Instagram's another big one where girls are now turning to for validation, but they don't really need you for that anymore. Okay, so the game has changed that way. It's changed dramatically. It's changed so much since I started. And back when I started 20 years ago, like 15, 20 years ago, this was really before cell phones became mainstream. Cell phones became mainstream, I want to say around late 90s, and back then, before cell phones became mainstream, if you wanted to get a girl's phone number, you actually had to, there were none of these pickup videos, by the way, so you had nothing to go off of. You had really no knowledge. You don't have like the wealth of resource that you have these days to know what to say, know what to do, and even like while you're in set with her, knowing what you're feeling inside. There were none of these resources before. So a lot of the old school pickup artists like myself had to figure it out just by using our gut instincts and using our feel. So back then, when you got a girl's phone number, you were really just approaching her like, you're not only approaching her cold, you were approaching her freezing cold. I mean, it was like you really just had to go off your gut instincts. And a lot of times back then, you could approach a girl and really you only had to talk to her for, you could talk to her for a couple of minutes and then grab her phone number and then leave and then call her, and she would actually pick up the phone and she would show up for the date. Now, why was it different back then? Okay, there are a few reasons why it was different back then. Okay, so back before cell phones, when you got a girl's phone number, for you guys who are old enough to remember, when you got a girl's phone number back then, you actually had to have two things with you: a piece of paper and a pen. Remember this? You had to have a piece of paper and a pen. And if you didn't have a piece of paper and a pen, you had to memorize her phone number, like on the spot. You had to memorize her phone number and then run to the nearest convenience store or the nearest cashier or even the nearest stranger and ask them if they had a pen. And then frantically you would write her phone number down on your hand before you forgot. Okay, and a lot of times I did have girls write their number down on my hand. If I didn't have paper and they happened to have a pen, I would say, here, write it on my hand. And that's how I got a lot of phone numbers. At one point, before cell phones became mainstream, this is like the mid-90s, I had a stack of phone numbers. I'm not even kidding. It was like this huge, of like little square pieces of paper with girls' phone numbers on it. I mean, it was this large. It was so ridiculous looking. And a lot of my guy friends, when they would come over, they would just like sift through all the different names, and they were like, "These are all girls' phone numbers." And I'm like, "Yeah, these are girls that I've approached, and I got their numbers." And I was getting so many dates back then that I just couldn't go out with all of them. I mean, it was like, so that was a good part, was like back then, before cell phones became mainstream, and before pickup advice became mainstream, it was very, very difficult to work up the nerve to walk up to a pretty girl and not only get her phone number, but actually engage in conversation with her, introduce yourself, and then ask her out. And typically my approach was generally 60 seconds to 2 minutes. I would walk up to her, I'd say, "Hi, my name's Matt. I thought you were cute, and I just wanted to say hi and get to know you, and do you live in this area? Where are you from?" Just make small chit chat, and then I would end it by saying, "Well, do you want to go out sometime? Let me get your number." And then most times she would say, "Yeah, okay." And when you would call a girl back then, something shocking would happen. She would actually answer the phone. Now, why would she answer the phone? Okay, she would answer the phone because generally back then, before cell phones, when a girl gave you a phone number, she was giving you her home phone number. Okay, she was giving you her home phone number. So, and a lot of people back then didn't have caller ID. I think caller ID became more popularized also in the late 90s, maybe mid 90s to late 90s. A lot of people back then didn't have caller ID either, because that was an extra charge that you had to pay on your phone bill to have caller ID. So a lot of times you call a girl and she would just have to pick it up because she wouldn't know who it is, right? And she'd pick it up out of curiosity. And lo and behold, when it's you, she wouldn't hang up on you, she'd actually talk to you. So back then, when you got a girl's phone number, you called her up, you would call her home phone. A lot of times a conversation would go anywhere from 30 minutes, even up to a few hours. Some of these girls I kept on the phone all night. It's like, the first conversation. And the good part it was like, back then, when you called a girl at home and she would talk to you for half an hour or a couple hours, she really got to know you, and she got to see your personality, and you had the time to actually show that to her. She really just sat on the phone with you, to the point where when you asked her out, for a date, like by the end of your conversation, you would generally say, "Well, what are you doing, tomorrow or the next day?" And you'd ask her out. She would generally agree. She'd say yes, and she would go. She would go on the date with you. Okay. And generally back then, this was also before Starbucks became mainstream, because Starbucks became mainstream pretty much around the same time that cell phones became mainstream. So we're talking late 90s. But before cell phones and Starbucks became mainstream, you actually had to take a girl out on a real date. Okay, so none of this coffee nonsense. You would actually have to take her to dinner. And even though it was a little bit more expensive, the good part about that was you had more time to sit there with her, get to know her a little bit more. Generally, you'd end up making out on that date afterwards. You generally end up getting physical on that date. And usually, if she went out with you one or two more times, she would become your girlfriend. So back then, after 2 or 3 good dates with her, she's your girlfriend. That's it. You have a hot girlfriend. 3 dates. That's it. It was very, very plain and simple. Where the game since then, and we're only talking 15 years ago, the game since then has changed dramatically. It's changed so dramatically. It's like it's almost hard to believe how much the game's changed. And a lot of it is due to I'd say most of it is due to technology. Okay, most of it is due to not only cell phones, but social media and all these apps that are coming out that are feeding into women's narcissism, where they don't really need to turn to a guy anymore to get that shot of validation. They can easily just flip on their smartphone and look at their Instagram and how many followers they have if they want that shot of validation. Where a lot of girls these days, they aren't even using Facebook. Um, I've noticed that with many of the hot girls that I'm meeting that are between the ages of 18 to 22, this new generation coming in, they're barely using Facebook anymore. Like I said, they're mostly on Snapchat, Instagram, Pinterest, and that's pretty much where they're getting their little shots of validation. They're not turning to, they're not needing to go out on a date with you anymore in order to get that. Where back in the old days, they would need to go out on a date with you and get you to like them in order to get that shot of validation, where they don't need you for that anymore. All right, so that's where the game's changed. And even just 5 years ago, we're talking 2010. 2010, that was like 5 years ago. Girls were still heavily on Facebook. And back then, when I'd get a girl's phone number, I would always make a point to say, okay, well, let me add you on Facebook as well. Just in case my approach didn't go well, or just in case I didn't have enough time with her, or I felt like she was gonna flake on me if I asked her out for a date, I'd say, okay, well, let me get your Facebook, I'll add you on Facebook. And then I could kind of game her through Facebook just as a backup to make sure that no matter what happens, I still have a decent shot at getting the girl. Okay, and I have a high value Facebook, or I created a high value Facebook, got a lot of photos on there, giving me social proof, a lot of photos of me with very attractive women, photos of me with my friends doing really, adventurous, exciting things. So, generally when I get a girl's phone number, if I wasn't able to game her the traditional way through the phone or in person, I was able to use my Facebook to continue gaming her, where she could, add me on Facebook, and then she could go through my profile, see all my high value photos, and then really decide for herself, like, hey man, this is a cool guy, this is a high value guy, I do want to get to know this guy. And 99% of the time it worked. So if I sent her a text, she'd be like, hey, or she'd send me a message on Facebook, she'd be like, oh, you seem totally cool, and yeah, I'd love to go out with you. So a lot of times Facebook would do the work for me, and I wouldn't have to really do much. Okay, where, like I said, these days that's completely changed. A lot of these hotter girls that are coming in now, this newer generation, the 18 to 22, so far the 18 to 22-year-olds that I've been gaming, most of these chicks don't even use Facebook, or they might have a Facebook account, but they don't really use it. Again, they're on Snapchat, Instagram. A lot of them aren't even using Twitter anymore. It's just Snapchat, Instagram, and Pinterest. Okay, and my thoughts on the future of game going forward is it's only going to get worse. You're just going to have more social media sites popping up. You're going to have more entrepreneurs creating these apps to feed into women's narcissism, and you really can't blame them, because women are eating this up like crazy. And if you are an entrepreneur, it might be a good idea to create an app to just feed into their narcissism even more. But does this mean it's the end of game for us? No, absolutely not. Because one thing that's never changed about game, and one thing that will never change about game, is playing solid game. Okay, so long as you play solid game, you will always be able to get the girl. And that's just never going to change. I can think of every approach I've done since I first started in the game. Every time I played solid game and I was on, I always got the girl. From the very beginning till present day, it still works. And this is why a lot of the principles I teach, just because the game is changing, especially these days, it's changing so rapidly, I always make sure that any of the principles I teach to my students are not only super powerful, but more importantly, that they are timeless, okay? And I always joke with my students that you could get in a time machine and go 1,000 years into the future, and all of the principles you learned from me will still work, okay? It will still work, so long as you play solid game. So with the rise of smartphones and the rise of cell phones, period, it's made it very, very easy to get a girl's phone number. It's super easy, because basically everybody out there has a smartphone these days. And how hard is it to walk up to a girl and just go, "Hey, my name's Bill. Let me get your phone number." 99% of the time, she's going to give you her phone number. Now, why are girls more open to giving you their phone number these days? They're more open to giving you their phone number these days because they know they can simply ignore your call. They can simply ignore your text messages, which they often do. But don't think they're not getting anything out of this in return, because they are getting that little dopamine rush every time they see their cell phone ring, every time they get a text message. They get that little rush of dopamine, that little shot of validation that they want. All right, so to wrap this up, the game's going to keep changing. The future of game is you're just going to have more of these app companies. You're going to have more of these social media sites springing up, and they're all just going to keep feeding into women's narcissism, because obviously it's highly profitable. And but this doesn't mean that, and it will never mean that it's over for game. I mean, that's just never going to happen. All it means is you just have to stick to the same principle that I've been sticking to for the last 20 years. And trust me, there's a reason I've been in this game for as long as I have, because I stick to that principle of playing solid game. And this is why I tell guys, even when you're just getting a number close, man, you have to play solid game, especially these days. Okay, you can't just get a number and bounce. Okay, and that was the difference in the old days. Was as I've had students who said, like, how come before, when I used to call a girl, you know, I used to be able to get her out on a date and she'd return my calls and blah blah blah, and I'd say, well, what number were you calling? You weren't calling her cell phone back then, you were calling her home phone. Okay, so you're calling her home phone, where when you call her at home, you know, many times, like, her mom would answer the phone, or her brother would answer the phone, and you would hear them be like, yell for her, like, hey, do you know this guy named Matt? He's on the phone, you know, and then she'd come to the phone. I mean, nowadays, like, when you call a girl, it's going to be her who answers the phone, right? So the future of game, like I said, you're just going to see more and more of these social media companies and these apps like springing up out of nowhere to just continue feeding into women's validation, where they won't need to necessarily turn to you for that. They won't need to turn to guys for that, where in the past they did. So this is why I'm big on, like I said, working solid game and really, really getting the girl to invest in you emotionally. Because when the girl invests in you emotionally, guess what? There is not an app in the world, there's not a social media site in the world that can replace that. Okay? There's not an app or a social media site in the world that can replace that emotional investment that you got from her. It's like a diamond. It's like a precious diamond, because so very few guys can do that. Okay, so very few guys can get a very hot girl, an 8, 9, or 10, to emotionally invest in them. Why? Because they lack dating education, because they don't watch these pickup videos like you're watching right now. And even if they are, they're watching the wrong pickup videos. Because there are a lot of videos that I see out there that, you know, just won't work anymore. They just won't work anymore. And this is why, like I said, I've been in the game as long as I have, and I'm going to continue to stay in the game until I'm dead, most likely. So obviously, as a professional pickup artist and as a professional dating instructor, I need to stay on top of these trends, and I need to be able to teach those trends to my students so that you can continue to be successful as well. And anything that I see that, if I don't feel it's going to work, even just 2 or 3 years from now, I'm not even going to bother with it. I'm not even going to teach it. Okay, I'm only looking for things that I know will continue to work over and over, long into the future and long after we're gone. Because obviously, you know, these videos are going to be up in cyberspace forever, long after I'm gone. And I want whoever watches it in the future, even 100 years from now, to be able to watch this and go, hey, you know, this guy's stuff, it still works. Whoa, you know, it still works. So I'm very big on that, teaching principles that I know are timeless. And like I said, the thing that is going to beat, the number one secret, the thing that's going to beat all of these social media sites and these app companies is getting that emotional investment from the girls that you approach. Okay, getting them to emotionally invest in you and really creating that romantic connection with them. Okay, and that's what I call solid game. okay? Because you can't do that, you can't get that emotional connection from them if all you're doing is walking up to them, getting their phone number, and then taking off. As you can see in my own infield videos, many of the infield videos that I posted recently, you never see me do that. Okay, I always walk up to the girl, I approach her, and I make sure to build attraction, comfort, and rapport before I ever ask for her number. And after I ask for her number, I always stay in the set. I don't just take off. I stay and I talk to her for a little bit more. Most times I'll try to get her out on an instant date with me, and even if I can't get her on the instant date and she's like, okay, well I have to go meet my friends now, I will walk with her, I will go with her. I'll be like, okay, where's your car? I'll walk you to your car. She'll be like, no, I'm catching the subway. Okay, cool, I'll walk you to the subway. I'll always buy myself as much time as I possibly can to really connect with her, friggin' show her my personality so she could really get a solid feel for who I am, because as I always say, a girl's not gonna sleep with you until she knows who you are. Really build that emotional connection with her so that she'll make the decision to invest in me emotionally, date me, have sex with me, become my girlfriend if I want. So that is the future of game going forward, is you're just gonna have more companies feeding into women's validation, just like crack. But the way to combat that is always what it has been since the very first day I started in game. It's never going to change. It's playing solid game, getting that girl to emotionally invest in you. Okay, really build that romantic connection. All right. So until next time, this is M from 33 Secrets, and if you enjoyed what you just learned in this new secret training video, as always, don't forget to add yourself to my priority waiting list for my full training course, The 33 Secrets to Dating Beautiful Women, where you can learn my top 33 secrets for dating only the hottest, youngest, and most beautiful looking women on the planet, 8s, 9s, and 10s. All you need to do is click the link above, pop in your name and email, and you're all set. It takes 2 seconds. So do that right now, and I'll see you in my next training video.